"You can handle all 5 of us," said the beautiful women living in his inherited cabin. Clayton Reeves stared at the deed in his trembling hands, reading the same words for the 10th time. Uncle Jeremiah's isolated mountain cabin was supposed to be empty, abandoned for 3 years since the old man's death. The lawyer had been very clear about that, so why was smoke rising from the chimney and 5 horses grazing peacefully in the meadow below? He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground as he approached the wooden structure. Through the windows he could see movement inside, shadows dancing in the warm lamplight. The sound of women's laughter drifted through the crisp morning air, followed by the clatter of dishes and the scrape of chairs across wooden floors. Clayton knocked on the door, his heart pounding with confusion and something else he couldn't name. When it opened, his breath caught in his throat. The most beautiful woman he had ever seen stood before him, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her green eyes studying him with a mixture of curiosity and weariness. She was tall and graceful, with a kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Behind her, 4 other women appeared, each stunning in their own way. A redhead with fierce blue eyes crossed her arms and tilted her head. A petite blonde with gentle features peered around the doorframe. A brunette with calculating dark eyes remained in the shadows, while another woman with auburn hair and an air of quiet strength stood near the fireplace. The woman at the door smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was melodic yet firm, carrying an undertone of challenge that made Clayton's pulse quicken. The words that came from her lips were not what he expected, and they would change everything he thought he knew about his inheritance, his uncle, and the 5 mysterious women who seemed to belong in a place that was legally his. But as Clayton stood there speechless and captivated, he had no idea that these women held secrets that reached back decades, secrets that would force him to question everything he believed about his family's past and his own future. Clayton's mouth went dry as he found his voice. "I'm Clayton Reeves. This cabin belongs to me now. My Uncle Jeremiah left it to me in his will." He held up the deed with shaking fingers, the official seal clearly visible on the weathered parchment. The woman at the door, who seemed to be their leader, didn't even glance at the document. Instead, she stepped aside with fluid grace, gesturing for him to enter. "I'm Clarabel. Please come inside. We need to talk." Her voice carried an authority that made Clayton's chest tighten with an unfamiliar mixture of attraction and unease. The interior of the cabin was nothing like Clayton remembered from his childhood visits. Rich fabrics draped the windows, elegant furniture filled the rooms, and the scent of lavender and wood polish hung in the air. These women had clearly made this place their home, and they had done so with care and permanence. The redhead stepped forward, her blue eyes flashing with defiance. "I'm Ruby Callahan, and before you start making demands, you should know that we have every right to be here." She crossed her arms, her stance suggesting she was prepared for a fight. The petite blonde moved closer, her gentle demeanor contrasting sharply with Ruby's aggression. "I'm Sadie Quinn. We're not trying to cause trouble. Truly, we're not." Her voice was soft, almost pleading, and Clayton felt an unexpected urge to reassure her. The brunette in the shadows finally stepped into the light, her calculating gaze never leaving Clayton's face. "Violet McCall," she said simply, offering no explanation or apology for her presence. The last woman, with her auburn hair and quiet strength, approached from the fireplace. "Grace Maddox, we've been expecting you, Mr. Reeves, though perhaps not quite so soon." Her words carried weight, as if she knew something he didn't. Clayton looked around the room, taking in the 5 pairs of eyes, watching him intently. Each woman was beautiful in her own way, but there was something more than beauty here. There was intelligence, determination, and secrets hidden behind those carefully composed faces. Clarabel moved to stand directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume and feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Her green eyes locked with his, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried clearly through the silent room. "The question isn't whether you own this cabin, Clayton. The question is whether you can handle what comes with it." She paused, her lips curving into a smile that was both invitation and challenge. "You can handle all 5 of us." The words hung in the air between them like a dare, and Clayton realized that whatever he had expected to find in this remote mountain cabin, it wasn't this. These women weren't just squatters or trespassers. They were something else entirely, and the way Clarabel was looking at him suggested that his quiet life was about to become anything but peaceful. But before he could respond, Grace stepped forward with a folded piece of paper in her hand, and the expression on her face told him that everything he thought he knew about his inheritance was about to change. Grace unfolded the paper with deliberate slowness, her auburn hair catching the lamplight as she leaned forward. "This is a contract signed by your uncle 3 months before he died. It grants us residence rights to this property for as long as we need it, in exchange for maintaining the cabin and the surrounding land." Clayton's heart sank as he examined the document. The signature was unmistakably Uncle Jeremiah's, the same scrawling handwriting he remembered from birthday cards and letters. The contract was detailed, specific, and appeared completely legitimate. His dreams of a simple inheritance and peaceful solitude crumbled like dry leaves in his hands. "That's impossible," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The lawyer never mentioned any existing agreements. He told me the property was mine, free and clear." Ruby stepped closer, her presence radiating a heat that made Clayton acutely aware of how small the cabin felt with all 6 of them inside. "Lawyers don't always know everything, do they? Sometimes old men keep secrets, even from their family." Her words carried a suggestion that made his pulse quicken, though he couldn't quite grasp what she was implying. Sadie moved to the window, her delicate profile silhouetted against the morning light. "Your uncle was a good man, Mr. Reeves. He understood that sometimes people need a place to start over, away from questions and judgments." Her voice trembled slightly, hinting at pain she kept carefully hidden. Violet remained near the shadows, but Clayton could feel her dark eyes studying him with unnerving intensity. "The question is what you intend to do about it. We've made this place our home for over 2 years. We've improved the land, repaired the buildings, and we have nowhere else to go." Clarabel circled him slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. Yet there was something almost protective in her movement. When she stopped directly in front of him again, Clayton caught his breath. She was close enough that he could see the fleck of gold in her green eyes, close enough that the warmth from her body seemed to envelop him. "We could fight this in court," she said softly, her fingers trailing along the edge of the contract. "We could drag this through legal proceedings for months, maybe years, or we could find another arrangement." The way she said the word arrangement sent electricity through Clayton's veins. There was something in her tone, in the way her eyes held his, that suggested possibilities he hadn't considered. The other women watched this exchange with varying expressions. Ruby with amusement, Sadie with worry, Violet with calculation, and Grace with something that looked almost like approval. "What kind of arrangement?" Clayton asked, surprised by the roughness in his own voice. Clarabel's lips curved into that enigmatic smile again. "The kind where everyone gets what they need. The kind where a man learns that sometimes the most valuable things in life come in unexpected packages." Before Clayton could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. Ruby moved to the window, her body tensing like a bowstring. "They found us," she whispered. And for the first time since Clayton had arrived, he saw real fear in her eyes. The other women immediately began moving with practiced efficiency, as if they had prepared for this moment many times before. Whatever was coming up that mountain trail, these 5 women had been running from it. And now Clayton found himself caught in the middle of something far more dangerous than a simple property dispute. Clayton moved instinctively toward the window, but Clarabel's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Her touch sent a jolt through his arm, and when their eyes met, he saw not just fear, but fierce determination. "Stay away from the window," she whispered urgently. "They can't know you're here." 3 riders emerged from the tree line, their dark clothing making them stand out against the snow-dusted landscape. Even from a distance, Clayton could see they carried themselves like men accustomed to violence, their hands resting casually on their gun belts as they surveyed the cabin. Ruby's jaw clenched as she peered through a gap in the curtains. "It's Morrison and his men. They've been tracking us for weeks." Her voice carried a bitterness that made Clayton's chest tighten with an unexpected protectiveness. Sadie moved closer to Grace, seeking comfort, and Clayton noticed how the older woman immediately wrapped a protective arm around the younger girl's shoulders. Whatever these women had been through together had forged bonds deeper than friendship. "Who is Morrison?" Clayton asked in a low voice, acutely aware of Clarabel's hand still wrapped around his wrist. Her skin was soft yet calloused, speaking of someone who had worked with her hands, but retained an undeniable femininity. "A man who believes he owns what isn't his," Violet answered from the shadows, her dark eyes reflecting a hatred that seemed to burn from within. "A man who thinks women are property to be claimed and controlled." Clarabel finally released Clayton's wrist, but not before her thumb traced a small circle across his pulse point, a gesture so subtle and intimate it made his breath catch. "Morrison held papers claiming we belonged to him, legal documents that would have made us little more than indentured servants." The riders had stopped their horses near the corral, and Clayton could see them talking among themselves, pointing toward the cabin and the fresh tracks his own horse had left in the soft earth. Morrison, a tall man with graying hair and cold eyes, dismounted and began walking toward the front door. Grace moved with quiet efficiency, gathering papers from a wooden chest and tucking them into her bodice. We escaped 3 months ago, but Morrison has connections throughout the territory. Men like him don't accept losing what they consider their property. Clayton felt anger building in his chest, a rage he hadn't experienced since his younger days. The thought of these 5 remarkable women being treated as possessions made his hands clench into fists. "You're under my protection now," he said without thinking, then surprised himself with the conviction in his voice. Clarabel turned to him, her green eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "Are you certain you want to make that choice, Clayton? Standing with us means standing against men who have no regard for law or decency." Before he could answer, Morrison's heavy footsteps sounded on the wooden porch, followed by 3 sharp knocks on the door. The cabin fell silent except for the soft whisper of breathing and the rapid beating of Clayton's heart. "We know you're in there, ladies," Morrison's voice called through the door, smooth and cultured, but carrying an underlying threat. "Time to come home where you belong." Clarabel moved even closer to Clayton, her body heat warming his side as she whispered against his ear, "Whatever happens next, remember that some choices change a man forever." Clayton made his decision in that instant. He stepped toward the door, but Clarabel caught his arm again, her fingers pressing into his muscle with desperate strength. The brief contact sent warmth shooting through his entire body, and he could smell the faint scent of her hair like wildflowers and mountain air. "Don't," she breathed, her lips so close to his ear that he could feel her warm breath against his neck. "You don't understand what you're risking." But Clayton had already reached for the door handle. Something about these 5 women, about their quiet dignity and hidden strength, had awakened a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. When he opened the door, Morrison's pale eyes immediately fixed on him with calculating interest. "Well, well," Morrison said, his thin smile never reaching his eyes. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Thomas Morrison, and I'm here to collect my property." "There's no property here that belongs to you," Clayton replied, stepping fully into the doorway and blocking Morrison's view of the interior. "This is private land, and you're trespassing." Morrison's 2 companions shifted in their saddles, hands moving subtly closer to their weapons. Clayton noticed their movement, but kept his focus on Morrison, whose smile had grown wider and more predatory. "I think you misunderstand the situation, friend. These 5 women signed contracts with me, legal agreements that I intend to honor. They've been hiding from their responsibilities long enough." From behind, Ruby's voice, sharp with fury, cut in. "Those contracts were signed under duress after you threatened our families and destroyed our homes. We owe you nothing." Morrison's facade cracked slightly, revealing the cruel man beneath the polished exterior. "Contracts are contracts, Miss Callahan. The law is quite clear on such matters." Sadie appeared beside Clayton, her small frame trembling, but her voice steady. "The law also says women aren't cattle to be bought and sold. We're free citizens of this territory." Morrison's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Freedom is a luxury women in your position can't afford. You have debts to pay, all of you." Clayton felt Clarabel move behind him, her presence like a flame at his back. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Our debts were manufactured by you, Morrison. Falsified records, forged documents, intimidation of witnesses. We have proof." "Proof?" Morrison's eyes gleamed with interest. "I'd very much like to see this alleged evidence." Violet stepped from the shadows, a leather satchel in her hands, documentation of every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every witness you paid to lie. 3 months gave us plenty of time to gather what we needed. Morrison's composure finally shattered, his face twisting with rage. "You scheming witches think you can outsmart me. I have judges in my pocket, marshals who owe me favors. Your little collection of papers means nothing." Clayton moved protectively in front of the women, his heart pounding as he realized the true scope of what he'd stepped into. These weren't just 5 women running from an unpleasant arrangement. They were witnesses to corruption that reached deep into the territorial government. Morrison's hand dropped to his gun, and his voice turned deadly quiet. "Step aside, stranger. This doesn't concern you, and I'd hate for you to get hurt over women who aren't worth the powder to blow them up." But before anyone could react, Grace appeared with something in her hand that made Morrison's face go white with shock. Clayton realized that whatever these women had been hiding was far more dangerous than any of them had revealed. Grace stepped forward, her hand extended toward Morrison, revealing a small silver locket that caught the afternoon light. Morrison's face went ashen, and Clayton could see his hands trembling as he stared at the simple piece of jewelry. "You recognize this, don't you?" Grace's voice was steady, but Clayton could hear the underlying steel in her tone. "It belonged to your wife, Margaret, the wife you claimed died of consumption 5 years ago." Morrison's composure cracked completely, his voice becoming a harsh whisper. "Where did you get that?" "From Margaret herself, 3 weeks ago in Denver. She's very much alive, Thomas, and very interested in sharing her story with the territorial authorities." Grace's words hit Morrison like physical blows, and Clayton watched the man's carefully constructed facade crumble. Clarabel moved to stand beside Clayton, her shoulder brushing against his arm in a gesture that seemed casual, but sent electricity through his entire body. "Margaret told us everything, how you had her declared dead so you could steal her father's mining claims, how you've been using those claims to finance your scheme to acquire women through fraudulent contracts." Ruby stepped forward, her blue eyes blazing with satisfaction. "She also told us about the other women, Thomas, the ones who tried to resist you and simply disappeared. Margaret kept records of all of them." Clayton felt his anger building to dangerous levels. The thought of this man destroying lives, treating women as disposable property, made his hands clench into fists. Without conscious thought, he moved protectively closer to the women, creating a barrier between them and Morrison. Sadie's soft voice carried clearly in the tense silence. "We have statements from 12 other women, all willing to testify about your methods. The territorial marshal is expecting our evidence within the week." Morrison's pale eyes darted between the women, calculating his options. Clayton could see the moment the man realized his position was hopeless, and the transformation was frightening. The cultured mask fell away completely, revealing the predator beneath. "You think you've won?" Morrison snarled, his hand hovering over his gun. "Even if everything you say is true, you're still here in the middle of nowhere with no witnesses except this fool who stumbled into something he doesn't understand." Violet emerged fully from the shadows for the first time, and Clayton was struck by her ethereal beauty and the intelligence burning in her dark eyes. Actually, We have quite a few witnesses. Your conversation has been heard by more people than you realize." As if summoned by her words, the sound of multiple horses approaching echoed across the valley. Clayton turned to see at least 6 riders emerging from the forest, their badges glinting in the sunlight. The territorial marshal and his deputies had arrived with perfect timing. Morrison's face twisted with rage and desperation. In that moment, Clayton realized the man would rather see everyone dead than face justice. Morrison's hand moved toward his weapon, but before Clayton could react, Clarabel pressed something cold and heavy into his palm. "Some men only understand one kind of language," she whispered against his ear, her breath warm against his skin. "The question is whether you're prepared to speak it." Clayton looked down to see Uncle Jeremiah's old revolver in his hand, and suddenly understood that his quiet life was truly over, replaced by something far more dangerous and infinitely more meaningful. The weight of the revolver in Clayton's hand felt familiar. Memories of hunting trips with Uncle Jeremiah flooded back. But this wasn't about bringing down game for dinner. This was about protecting 5 remarkable women who had somehow managed to turn the tables on a man who thought himself untouchable. Morrison's desperate gaze shifted between the approaching lawman and the people blocking his escape route. Clayton could see the calculation in those pale eyes, the moment when a cornered predator decides to fight rather than surrender. "Marshal Thompson!" Clarabel called out, her voice carrying across the valley with clear authority. "We have Thomas Morrison here, along with evidence of his crimes against territorial citizens." The marshal, a weathered man with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes, dismounted with practiced ease. "Miss Bell, good to see you again. I trust you ladies have been well." Clayton felt a jolt of surprise. Clarabel knew the marshal personally, which meant this entire confrontation had been orchestrated far more carefully than he had realized. These women weren't just victims who had stumbled onto evidence. They were intelligent, connected, and had been planning Morrison's downfall for months. Morrison's hand twitched toward his gun, but froze when he saw 6 rifles trained on him from the mounted deputies. The man was many things, but he wasn't suicidal. Yet Clayton could see the rage building in his face, the fury of a man who had never been denied what he wanted. Ruby moved closer to Clayton, her presence warm and reassuring. "The marshal has been investigating Morrison for over a year. We contacted him weeks ago when we realized we had enough evidence to bring charges." Sadie stepped forward with the leather satchel, offering it to Marshal Thompson. "Everything is documented, sir. Names, dates, forged contracts, witness statements, and financial records showing how Morrison used his wife's supposed death to steal mining claims." As the marshal examined the contents of the satchel, Clayton became aware of Clarabel standing directly behind him, close enough that he could feel the heat from her body through his coat. When she spoke, her voice was meant only for his ears. "You could have walked away, you know. You could have seen Morrison's men and decided this wasn't your fight." Her hand found his free one, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that felt both intimate and natural. "Why didn't you?" Clayton turned slightly, finding himself looking directly into those mesmerizing green eyes. "Because some things are worth fighting for, even when you've only just discovered them." The moment between them stretched, charged with possibilities and unspoken promises, until Marshal Thompson's voice broke the spell. "Thomas Morrison, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Deputies, secure the prisoner." But as the lawman moved to apprehend Morrison, the man's desperation finally overcame his caution. With a roar of rage, he drew his weapon, not aiming for the deputies or even Clayton, but directly at Clarabel, the woman who had orchestrated his downfall. Time seemed to slow as Clayton realized that all their careful planning, all their evidence and witnesses, would mean nothing if Morrison succeeded in his final act of vengeance. Clayton's instincts took over before his mind could process what was happening. He pivoted sharply, pulling Clarabel behind him with one arm while raising Uncle Jeremiah's revolver with the other. Morrison's shot rang out simultaneously with Clayton's, the two sounds blending into a single thunderous crack that echoed off the mountain walls. Morrison's bullet splintered the doorframe inches from where Clarabel's head had been. Clayton's shot found its mark, hitting Morrison in the shoulder and spinning him around. The man's weapon flew from his grasp, landing in the dirt near the horse's feet. Marshal Thompson and his deputies moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding Morrison as he clutched his wounded shoulder and cursed through gritted teeth. "That's enough, Morrison. It's over." Clayton became aware of Clarabel pressed against his back, her hands gripping his coat, her rapid breathing warm against his neck. The realization of how close he had come to losing her, losing this extraordinary woman he had known for mere hours, but who had already changed his life completely, made his hands shake. "Are you hurt?" he asked, turning to face her, his voice rough with emotion and adrenaline. Clarabel's green eyes were wide, but not with fear, with something else entirely. "No, thanks to you." Her hands moved from his coat to his face, her palms warm against his cheeks. "You could have been killed." "So could you," Clayton replied, covering her hands with his own. In that moment, with the danger past and her touch grounding him, he understood that everything in his life had led to this instant, to protecting this woman and the four others who had somehow become his responsibility and his purpose. Ruby approached Morrison as the deputies bound his wounded arm, her blue eyes blazing with satisfaction. "How does it feel, Thomas, to finally face consequences for your actions?" Morrison looked up at her with pure hatred. "This isn't over. I have friends, connections. You'll never be safe." Violet stepped forward, her dark eyes cold as winter. "Your connections are facing their own investigations, thanks to the evidence we've gathered. Your network of corruption is finished." Sadie moved to Grace's side as the marshal secured the documents that would ensure Morrison faced justice for his crimes. "It's really over, isn't it?" Sadie asked, her voice filled with wonder. Grace nodded, her arms wrapping protectively around the younger woman. "It's over, dear one. We're free." Marshal Thompson approached Clayton, extending his hand. "That was fine shooting, son. Morrison would have killed Miss Bell if not for your quick thinking." As Clayton shook the marshal's hand, he felt Clarabel's fingers slip into his free one, her touch sending warmth through his entire body. When he looked at her, he saw something in her expression that made his heart race faster than the gunfight had. "What happens now?" Clayton asked, though he found himself hoping desperately that whatever came next would include these 5 remarkable women who had turned his world upside down in the best possible way. Clarabel's smile was radiant, filled with possibilities he was only beginning to understand. Now we decide if you really can handle all 5 of us. 3 months later, Clayton stood on the porch of his uncle's cabin, watching the 5 women who had transformed not just his property, but his entire existence. The cabin had been expanded with additional rooms, the corral rebuilt to accommodate more horses, and the surrounding land cultivated into productive gardens and grazing areas. Marshal Thompson had returned the previous week with news that Morrison had been sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. His network of corruption had crumbled once the evidence was presented, and 3 judges had been removed from office. Margaret Morrison had reclaimed her father's mining rights and was using the proceeds to help other women escape similar situations. Ruby emerged from the barn, her red hair catching the afternoon sunlight as she led a newly broken horse into the corral. Her natural skill with animals had made her invaluable in establishing their horse breeding operation. She waved at Clayton, her smile bright and genuine, no longer shadowed by fear or anger. Sadie worked in the garden alongside Violet. The 2 women had formed an unlikely but strong friendship. Sadie's gentle nature balanced Violet's calculating mind perfectly. Together, they had created a thriving vegetable garden that supplied not just their needs, but provided surplus for trade with neighboring settlements. Grace had established herself as the unofficial manager of their small community, keeping accounts and handling correspondence with buyers for their horses and produce. Her organizational skills and natural authority had turned their refuge into a profitable enterprise. But it was Clarabel who drew Clayton's attention most completely. She emerged from the house carrying a letter, her green eyes finding his immediately across the yard. The connection between them had grown deeper each day, built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and an attraction that had matured into something far more meaningful than simple desire. "Another order for horses," she said as she approached him, her smile warm and intimate. "3 ranchers in Colorado want breeding stock by spring." Clayton took the letter, but his attention remained focused on her face, on the contentment he saw there that matched his own. "We'll need to expand the operation again." "We will," she agreed, moving closer until she stood within the circle of his arms. The ease with which they had learned to touch, to share space and comfort, still amazed him. "Are you having second thoughts about our arrangement?" Clayton looked out over the property at the 4 other women who had become his family, his purpose, his responsibility, and his joy. "When Uncle Jeremiah left me this cabin, the old man could never have imagined the life I've built here." "Never," he said firmly, pulling Clarabel closer, "though I sometimes wonder if I'm the one who's being handled by 5 remarkable women rather than the other way around." Clarabel laughed, the sound bright and free. "Perhaps we're handling each other. Perhaps that's exactly as it should be." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Clayton realized that his uncle's final gift hadn't been the cabin or the land. It had been the chance to become the man he was meant to be, surrounded by people who challenged him, supported him, and loved him in their own unique ways. The quiet life he had once imagined seemed impossibly small compared to the rich, complex, beautiful existence he now lived. He had asked himself if he could handle 5 extraordinary women, and the answer had surprised him. They could handle each other together, and that made all the difference. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.